While most ancient empires forced conquered peoples to abandon their gods and worship new ones, there was one empire that did the exact opposite. It actually encouraged people to keep their religions, rebuild their temples, and practice their faiths freely. This wasn't weakness or indifference. It was the most sophisticated political strategy the ancient world had ever seen. Picture this. It's 539 before Christ, and Babylon, the greatest city in the world, has just fallen to a foreign army. But instead of the usual massacre, slavery, and religious persecution that conquered peoples expected, something unprecedented happens. The victorious king doesn't destroy the temples. He doesn't melt down the sacred statues. Instead, he issues a decree that will echo through history. All exiled peoples can return to their homelands, rebuild their temples, and worship their gods freely. This wasn't just mercy. It was genius. This was Cyrus the Great of Persia, and he had just launched the world's first experiment in religious tolerance on a massive scale. But here's what makes this truly remarkable. This wasn't a one-time gesture of goodwill. This became the official policy of an empire that would stretch from India to Greece, encompassing dozens of different peoples, languages, and faiths. For over 2 centuries, the Persian Empire, the largest the world had ever seen, would govern through tolerance rather than oppression. While Egyptian pharaohs claimed to be gods, while Assyrian kings tortured those who wouldn't convert, while Babylonian rulers forced conquered peoples to worship their deities, the Persians did something revolutionary. They let everyone keep their gods. But why? What drove this empire to embrace religious diversity when every instinct of ancient imperial power suggested the opposite? The answer reveals not just military and political genius, but a profound understanding of human nature that most empires completely missed. To understand how this revolutionary approach to empire building came to be, we need to journey back to a harsh plateau in what is now Iran, where a nomadic people called the Persians were about to change the course of human history forever. The story begins not in a palace or a temple, but on the windswept plateaus of ancient Iran, around 600 before Christ. The Persians were originally a nomadic people, part of the larger Iranian tribes that had migrated from Central Asia. Unlike the settled civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt, these were people who lived by movement, adaptation, and survival in harsh landscapes. Cyrus II was born into this world around 600 before Christ, heir to a small Persian kingdom that was vassal to the mighty Median Empire. But from his earliest years, Cyrus displayed something that would define his entire approach to power: an uncanny ability to understand what people truly wanted and needed. While other rulers focused on fear and submission, Cyrus studied human motivation with the precision of a scholar. The young Persian prince grew up watching how the Median kings ruled their diverse subjects. The Medes had conquered various Iranian tribes and imposed their own customs and religious practices. What Cyrus observed was crucial. The more the Medes tried to suppress local traditions, the more rebellious their subjects became. Resistance simmered constantly beneath the surface. Resources were wasted on garrison troops and punitive expeditions. The empire was strong but brittle, held together by force rather than loyalty. This observation would shape everything that followed. When Cyrus began his own rise to power around 559 before Christ, he made a radical decision. Instead of simply replacing Median oppression with Persian oppression, he would try something completely different. His first test case was revolutionary. When Cyrus defeated his grandfather Astyages and took control of the Median Empire in 550 before Christ, he didn't execute the captured king or humiliate the Median nobles. Instead, he incorporated them into his administration. Median customs were preserved alongside Persian ones. Median gods continued to receive worship and offerings. The message was clear: join us, and keep what makes you who you are. But Cyrus wasn't just being benevolent. He was being strategic. Every Persian policy was designed to solve a fundamental problem that plagued every empire before them. How do you govern millions of people across thousands of miles without bankrupting yourself on military occupation? The traditional answer had been brutal but expensive. Garrison every city, install your own governors, force conversion to your religion, and crush any sign of local identity. This required enormous armies, constant vigilance, and generated endless rebellions. The Assyrians had perfected this approach, and while it created fear, it also created hatred. Every conquered people dreamed of revenge. Cyrus realized there was another way. What if conquered peoples had reasons to support the empire rather than resist it? What if local leaders had incentives to cooperate rather than rebel? What if different communities could maintain their identities while contributing to a larger whole? The key insight was this: People will fight to the death for their gods, their customs, and their sense of identity. But if you threaten none of these things, if you actually protect them, then resistance becomes much less appealing than cooperation. Before we dive deeper into how this strategy transformed the ancient world, let me make a quick invitation. If you're new to the channel and you're enjoying the content so far, subscribe and hit the like button to help the channel grow. Now, let's return to ancient Persia and see how Cyrus put his revolutionary ideas into practice. When Cyrus set his sights on Lydia in 547 before Christ, he was facing Croesus, a king so wealthy that his name became synonymous with riches. Croesus ruled over Greeks, Lydians, and various Anatolian peoples, each with their own fierce local traditions. The standard approach would have been to crush Lydian power completely and impose Persian customs by force. Instead, Cyrus did something that baffled contemporary observers. After defeating Croesus, he spared the king's life and actually asked for his advice on governance. He maintained the existing administrative structure where it worked well. Greek cities that submitted were allowed to keep their laws and customs. Local temples continued to function exactly as they had before, with their same priests and their same rituals. The results were extraordinary. Instead of facing constant rebellions, Cyrus found that many cities actually sent him tribute voluntarily. Local governors had incentives to maintain order and prosperity because the system rewarded competence rather than just loyalty. Trade flourished because merchants didn't fear that their goods would be confiscated or their contracts invalidated by arbitrary religious restrictions. But the real test of this approach would come when Cyrus turned his attention to Babylon, the greatest prize in the ancient world, and a city that had crushed the dreams of conquerors for over a millennium. But what no one expected was that Babylon's fall would unleash a chain of events that would fundamentally reshape how humanity thought about empire, power, and the relationship between rulers and their subjects. The siege of Babylon in 539 before Christ wasn't just another military campaign. It was the moment when Cyrus's revolutionary approach to empire would face its ultimate test. Babylon wasn't just any city. It was the New York, London, and Paris of the ancient world combined. Its walls were so massive that chariots could race four abreast along the top. Its hanging gardens were counted among the wonders of the world. Its temples housed the accumulated wealth of centuries. More importantly, Babylon was home to dozens of different peoples who had been forcibly relocated there by previous conquerors. Jews exiled from Jerusalem, Phoenicians torn from their coastal cities, Elamites dragged from their mountain homes. All of them nursing grievances, all of them dreaming of return, all of them potential allies for a conqueror smart enough to offer them what they truly wanted. King Nabonidus of Babylon had made a fatal error that Cyrus would never have committed. In his zeal to promote the moon god Sin, Nabonidus had alienated the powerful priesthood of Marduk, Babylon's patron deity. He had moved sacred statues, altered ancient rituals, and dismissed traditional priests. The very people who should have been his strongest supporters had become his enemies. Cyrus saw this religious division and recognized it as an opportunity that went far beyond military tactics. While his armies approached Babylon's walls, his diplomats were already inside the city, meeting secretly with disaffected priests, exiled community leaders, and anyone else who had grievances against Nabonidus's religious policies. The message Cyrus sent was simple but revolutionary. I don't want to change your gods. I want to restore them. When Babylon fell, not through a bloody siege but through defection and internal collapse, Cyrus immediately demonstrated that his promises weren't empty political rhetoric. His first official act was to visit the temple of Marduk and perform the traditional rituals that legitimized rulership in Babylonian eyes. But he didn't stop there. He commissioned what would become known as the Cyrus Cylinder, often called the world's first charter of human rights. This clay document, written in Babylonian cuneiform, made extraordinary promises. All peoples exiled by previous Babylonian kings could return to their homelands. All temples that had been destroyed or neglected would be rebuilt at Persian expense. All local gods would receive the worship and respect they deserved. No one would be forced to abandon their ancestral customs or adopt Persian ways. But here's what made this truly genius. Cyrus wasn't just being generous. He was solving multiple strategic problems simultaneously. Every group that returned to rebuild their homeland became a Persian ally with strong incentives to remain loyal. Every restored temple became a center of Persian legitimacy. Every local leader who was confirmed in his traditional role became a stakeholder in the empire's success. The Jewish exile provides the perfect example of how this system worked. For nearly 70 years, the Jews had been captives in Babylon, dreaming of returning to Jerusalem and rebuilding their temple. Previous empires had seen this as a threat, a source of divided loyalty that needed to be crushed. Cyrus saw it as an opportunity. When he issued his famous decree allowing the Jews to return and rebuild the Temple of Solomon, he wasn't just being merciful. He was creating a grateful population that would serve as Persian allies on the strategically crucial border with Egypt. The Jews didn't just return home, they returned as enthusiastic supporters of Persian rule. The Hebrew Bible calls Cyrus Messiah, literally, anointed one, the only non-Jewish ruler ever granted this title. This pattern repeated across the empire. In Egypt, when Cyrus's successor Cambyses conquered the kingdom of the pharaohs, he carefully maintained traditional Egyptian religious practices. He participated in ceremonies honoring Egyptian gods, supported the ancient priesthood, and presented himself as a legitimate pharaoh rather than a foreign conqueror. Even when some Egyptian priests initially resisted, the Persian approach gradually won them over through practical benefits rather than threats. The economic implications were staggering. Traditional empires spent enormous resources garrisoning hostile territories and suppressing rebellions. The Persians discovered they could actually make money from tolerance. When people felt secure in their traditions, trade flourished. When local leaders had incentives to cooperate, tax collection became efficient rather than adversarial. When communities felt respected rather than oppressed, they contributed voluntarily to imperial projects. But the Persians took this system even further. They created what historians now call the satrap system, a form of provincial government that balanced imperial control with local autonomy. Each satrap, or provincial governor, was responsible for maintaining order and collecting taxes, but they were also expected to respect and protect local customs. Many satraps were actually recruited from local populations rather than being imposed from Persia. This created a fascinating dynamic. Local elites found that they could advance their careers and protect their community's interests by working within the Persian system rather than against it. The empire became, in many ways, a confederation of allied peoples rather than a collection of conquered subjects. The religious dimension of this approach went deeper than just tolerance. The Persians developed what scholars call theological diplomacy, the practice of actively supporting local religious institutions as a way of legitimizing Persian rule. Persian kings didn't just allow local gods to be worshipped, they often funded temple construction, participated in important ceremonies, and positioned themselves as protectors of traditional faiths. This wasn't cynical manipulation, it was a sophisticated understanding of how religious authority worked in the ancient world. People believed that legitimate rulers needed divine approval. By supporting local gods and their priests, Persian kings could claim that approval without requiring anyone to abandon their ancestral beliefs. The system even had built-in flexibility for dealing with conflicts between different religious traditions within the same territory. Rather than imposing a single solution from above, Persian administrators often worked with local communities to develop compromises that respected everyone's core beliefs while maintaining civil order. However, the most remarkable aspect of this approach was how it transformed the Persians themselves. Governing through tolerance required a level of cultural sophistication and administrative complexity that gradually changed Persian society. The empire became a vast laboratory for cross-cultural exchange, with ideas, technologies, and artistic styles flowing freely across traditional boundaries. But what was about to happen would surpass all expectations and reveal how this system of tolerance would become both the greatest strength and the greatest vulnerability of the empire that would rule the known world for more than 2 centuries. The true test of Persian religious tolerance came not from external enemies, but from within their own borders, when they encountered a faith that would challenge everything they thought they knew about governing diverse peoples. Around 522 before Christ, during the reign of Darius I, a new religious movement was spreading across the Persian heartland, one that would force the empire to confront the limits of its own tolerant policies. Zoroastrianism, founded by the prophet Zoroaster, presented Persian rulers with an unprecedented dilemma. This wasn't just another local cult that could be easily accommodated alongside existing beliefs. This was a monotheistic religion that explicitly rejected the worship of multiple gods, the very foundation upon which Persian religious tolerance was built. Zoroaster preached that there was only one true God, Ahura Mazda, the wise Lord, and that all other deities were either false gods or demons. More challenging still, Zoroastrianism taught that there was an ongoing cosmic battle between good and evil, light and darkness, truth and lies. In this worldview, tolerating false religions wasn't just politically expedient, it was morally wrong. Here was the paradox that would define the next 2 centuries of Persian history. How could an empire built on religious tolerance accommodate a religion that fundamentally opposed tolerance itself? Darius I's solution was as brilliant as it was complex. Rather than abandoning the empire's tolerant policies or suppressing Zoroastrianism, he created what historians call a layered religious system. At the imperial level, Darius embraced Zoroastrianism and presented himself as the chosen servant of Ahura Mazda. His inscriptions at Persepolis and Behistun declare that he rules by divine mandate from the one true God. But at the provincial level, the old policies of tolerance continued unchanged. Local peoples could still worship their traditional gods, maintain their ancient temples, and practice their ancestral rituals. The genius lay in how Darius reconciled these seemingly contradictory approaches. He positioned local gods not as rivals to Ahura Mazda, but as his servants or manifestations. This theological innovation allowed Persian kings to be simultaneously Zoroastrian monotheists and protectors of polytheistic traditions. When Darius participated in Egyptian religious ceremonies, he wasn't betraying his faith. He was honoring Ahura Mazda through his local representatives. When he funded Greek temples, he wasn't supporting false gods. He was maintaining the cosmic order that Ahura Mazda had established. The practical results were extraordinary. The Persian Empire became the world's first truly multicultural superpower, where a Zoroastrian king could govern Egyptian polytheists, Jewish monotheists, Greek philosophers, and Babylonian astrologers within a single coherent system. But this achievement came with hidden costs that would eventually threaten the empire's very survival. The challenge of governing such religious diversity created an administrative burden that grew heavier with each new conquest. Persian bureaucrats had to become experts in dozens of different religious traditions, legal systems, and cultural practices. Every major decision required careful consideration of how it would affect multiple communities with potentially conflicting interests. More dangerously, the empire's commitment to tolerance made it vulnerable to manipulation by clever adversaries. When Alexander of Macedon invaded in 334 before Christ, he used Persian tolerance against them. In each conquered territory, Alexander presented himself as a liberator restoring local traditions that the Persians had supposedly corrupted. This was often completely false. The Persians had generally been scrupulous about respecting local customs, but it was effective propaganda. The Greeks proved particularly adept at exploiting this weakness. While Persian armies were structured to respect local sensibilities and minimize cultural disruption, Greek forces could be ruthlessly focused on purely military objectives. While Persian generals had to consider the religious implications of their strategic decisions, Alexander could concentrate solely on winning battles. But the real turning point came when the empire faced enemies who understood that Persian tolerance wasn't weakness, but strategy. The Scythians north of the Black Sea and various nomadic tribes along the empire's eastern borders had learned to use Persian religious policies as intelligence-gathering tools. They would send delegations claiming to seek religious protection under Persian law, then use their access to Persian territories to gather information about defenses, trade routes, and internal political divisions. Because Persian custom required treating religious pilgrims with respect and hospitality, these reconnaissance missions were nearly impossible to prevent without abandoning the very principles that held the empire together. The most sophisticated challenge came from within the Greek world itself. Philosophers like Aristotle, who tutored Alexander, had studied Persian governance extensively and identified its core vulnerability. The empire's strength came from voluntary cooperation, which meant it was only as strong as its subjects' willingness to remain loyal. This insight shaped Alexander's entire conquest strategy. Rather than simply defeating Persian armies, he focused on demonstrating that Persian protection was unreliable. He would arrive in a territory, defeat the local Persian garrison quickly and decisively, then immediately adopt local customs and religious practices. The message was clear. Why accept Persian rule when a stronger protector was available? The Persian response to this challenge revealed both the strengths and limitations of their approach. Some satraps and local leaders remained loyal even when Persian military protection failed, because they genuinely believed in the empire's principles and benefited from its systems. Others switched sides immediately when it became clear that Alexander was winning. But perhaps the most telling moment came during the final confrontation between Darius III and Alexander at Gaugamela in 331 before Christ. The Persian army that faced the Macedonians wasn't just Persian. It included troops from across the known world, fighting under their own banners, led by their own officers, motivated by their own reasons for supporting the empire. When that diverse coalition shattered under Alexander's assault, it didn't just mark the end of Persian military power. It represented the collapse of humanity's first serious attempt to build a truly multicultural empire based on mutual respect rather than conquest and oppression. Yet even in defeat, The Persian model proved its enduring value. Alexander himself adopted many Persian administrative practices, including religious tolerance and the use of local leaders in government. The Roman Empire would later incorporate similar policies. Even today, successful diverse societies often echo principles that the Persians pioneered over 2 millennia ago. The ultimate irony is that Persian religious tolerance, designed to create stability and loyalty, may have worked too well. By teaching their subjects that different peoples could coexist peacefully while maintaining their distinct identities, the Persians created populations that didn't necessarily need Persian protection to thrive. This realization leads us to a profound question about the nature of empire itself, and whether any political system built on voluntary cooperation rather than force can survive in a world where ruthless competitors are always ready to exploit that very cooperation as weakness. The Persian Empire's experiment in religious tolerance reveals one of history's most profound paradoxes. The very qualities that made it the most enlightened empire of its time also contained the seeds of its own destruction. For over 2 centuries, the Persians proved that diverse peoples could coexist, prosper, and contribute to a shared civilization without sacrificing their cultural identities. This wasn't just tolerance, it was the world's first successful model of multiculturalism on a massive scale. The legacy of Persian religious policy extends far beyond ancient history. When we examine the founding principles of modern democratic societies, we find echoes of innovations that Cyrus and his successors pioneered 25 centuries ago. The idea that government should protect rather than suppress religious diversity, that local communities should have autonomy within larger political frameworks, that different cultures can strengthen rather than weaken a unified state, these concepts that seem natural to us today were revolutionary in the ancient world. But the Persian example also offers sobering lessons about the challenges facing any society that chooses inclusion over uniformity. The administrative complexity of governing diverse populations, the vulnerability to exploitation by less scrupulous competitors, the constant balancing act between central authority and local autonomy, these are not just ancient problems. They are challenges that every multicultural democracy faces today. The most striking parallel lies in how Persian tolerance was weaponized against them. Just as Alexander used Persian respect for local customs as a propaganda tool, modern societies often struggle with how to maintain open, tolerant systems when confronted by groups that exploit that very openness to promote intolerant agendas. The Persians never solved this fundamental dilemma. How do you remain tolerant without becoming vulnerable to those who would destroy tolerance itself? Yet perhaps the most important lesson from Persian history is not about their ultimate defeat, but about their extraordinary achievement. For over 200 years, they created something that had never existed before and has rarely been achieved since, an empire where conquest led to cultural flowering rather than cultural destruction, where diversity was seen as strength rather than weakness, where different peoples could maintain their identities while participating in something larger than themselves. The Persian approach to religious tolerance wasn't perfect, and it ultimately couldn't prevent the empire's military defeat. But it established principles that continue to influence how we think about governance, religious freedom, and cultural diversity. In a world still struggling with questions of how different communities can coexist peacefully, the Persian experiment remains remarkably relevant. The empire that began with a nomadic prince's radical idea, that people could be governed through respect rather than fear, created a template for multicultural civilization that outlasted their political power by millennia. Their tolerance wasn't weakness disguised as virtue. It was a sophisticated understanding of human nature that recognized cooperation as more powerful than coercion, inclusion as more sustainable than oppression. This ancient experiment in religious tolerance offers us both inspiration and warning as we navigate our own complex, diverse world, reminding us that the greatest empires are often those that lift up rather than tear down the cultures they encounter. If you made it this far and you're not subscribed yet, go ahead and subscribe now, hit the like button, and share in the comments what you think was the most surprising aspect of Persian religious tolerance. Until the next video.